Good morning. And I'm sure that we're going to have people trickling in here as we go. So to you hardy souls who got up early, welcome, and we're really happy to have you here. I want to thank our partners from Georgetown University and the Free Speech Project for putting on this event, and certainly and our funders from the Knight Foundation and the Lenfest Institute for Journalism. And absolutely want to thank Betsy Todelman, who is the goddess of all events, all important events here at Temple, and just matchless in her attention to detail. So thanks for being here. And particularly Sandy Ungar, who is the force behind this. Sandy, you have our gratitude for choosing Temple for this next edition of the Free Speech Project. This really is the perfect place and the perfect time for a discussion like this one as we approach the 250th anniversary of the signing of the document that created this astounding experiment in self-governance known as the United States of America. Why is it the perfect place? Well, just 3.1 miles from here, at the corner of 6th and Chestnut, a collection of farmers, soldiers, craftsmen, barristers, and others, all of course white men, gathered in 1776 in what was then Pennsylvania's State House to ponder, debate, craft, and ultimately approve a document declaring the independence of the 13 colonies from the rule of Britain. Their action was, of course, as audacious as the language in that declaration that they printed and distributed back to their hometowns. Language that stated all men are created equal, again, all white men, but even that was a revolutionary idea at the time, and that governments derived their power from the consent of the governed. While that notion of freedom of speech was nowhere mentioned in that original document, nor was it mentioned in the Constitution that was crafted and approved in that very same building 11 years later, it was a value deeply held by many of the framers. As early as 1722, when he was 16 years old, Benjamin Franklin wrote in the New England Current, quote, "Without freedom of thought, there can be no such thing as wisdom, and no such thing as public liberty without freedom of speech." But the notion of memorializing that freedom in an organizing document was too much for the men who gathered in Philadelphia in 1787 to craft the Constitution. And by that point, freedom of speech had already been guaranteed in the Constitution of France and even in some of the constitutions of the newly formed American states. But members of the convention here just considered it too controversial to take on. 4 years later, in that very same Philadelphia building, which was then called Congress Hall, the U.S. Congress ratified the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, and the first of which guaranteed, of course, freedom of speech and, my personal favorite, freedom of the press. So yes, Philadelphia is in fact the perfect locale for this convention. There's a poetry in calling this symposium the Keystone Conversation. Our Commonwealth is the Keystone State, of course, named for the center of the arch, the one that holds all the masonry together, with the tension from the stones around it. Pennsylvania, which was smack in the middle of the 13 original states, and the first to abolish slavery, by the way, served that role. And so, I might posit, does free speech, which exists with and because of the tension in our nation. Without the Keystone, the arch will collapse. Without free speech, so goes our union. So yes, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania is the perfect location for this conversation. And this certainly is the right time, as I'm sure you'll all agree. Free speech has never been a simple and universally held concept in American life, to be sure. Never in my long professional life, first as a journalist and now as a higher ed administrator, has it been the point of contention that it is today. Historically, when freedom of speech has been debated, and it certainly has been throughout our history, most often the contention has centered on matters of public safety or national security. The speech in question was seen as somehow threatening the nation, so the argument went and needed to be quelled by the government. Today, having climbed through Alice's looking glass, we have a government insisting that its own speech has been throttled and that it needs to restrict the speech of others in order to free its own. And yes, we have those on the opposite end of the political spectrum who delight in trying to stifle speech rather than to engage it, who would rather call out opponents on social media rather than to call them in for dialogue. So yes, the time is perfect for this conversation. And nowhere better to host than on a college campus, particularly one founded on providing access to higher education to those who previously were denied it, a place where dialogue across fault lines is encouraged and nurtured. Higher education is at the vanguard of today's debates over free speech. Here at Temple, we encourage both active expression and active listening. We want students to not flatten out the complexity of disagreement and not to outsource to Instagram the hard work of critical reasoning. As our late Temple University President Joanne Epps used to tell us, we can disagree, but it doesn't have to be disagreeable. So we're honored to welcome the leaders from government, nonprofit, the media, the bar, the academy, and the community here today, as they and you assess the current and future state of free speech in our city, our region, and our nation. The topics that we'll cover here today range from academic freedom to banned books, economic mobility, and artificial intelligence. The program is so good, in fact, that it pains me to say that I'll be missing most of it myself. I will be in New York defending the First Amendment in a different way. I'm the immediate past chair and an executive committee member of a group called the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. Very, very active group these days defending press freedom. And we have our annual meeting and fundraising dinner tonight in New York, and I have to be there. So I beg your understanding for that, and wish you a wonderful, rich, enlightening meeting. I'm glad it will all be caught on video, and I will eagerly watch it when I get home. So thank you all very much, and thanks for being here.
I'm Sanford Ungar from Georgetown University. Sorry, director of the Free Speech Project. And we have our first panel of three extremely busy and sought-after people, knowledgeable people who agreed to give their time to us this morning. Wendy White, who is the General Counsel of, it says every time, of University of Pennsylvania and Penn Medicine.
Correct.
So that's an extra responsibility.
Indeed.
And Cherri Gregg, who has a very prominent role at WHYY here in Philadelphia, one of the outstanding beacons of public radio in the country, really. And those of us who've worked for public radio have all learned a lot from WHYY over the years. And Michael Berry, who is from Ballard, Spahr, and has a First Amendment law practice, as I understand it. So everybody here is ultra qualified to talk about this. And it's hard to know exactly where to begin in an overview of, we said, the state of free speech in America today, viewed from the excuse me, birthplace of American democracy. But I think I want to pick up something from what David Boardman said a few minutes ago about the decisions that had to be made about slavery in this country early on, and the fact that today, this is not intended to be a partisan statement, but a very important statement, I think. We have a president of the United States who keeps a particular refrain of saying, well, the evil of slavery has been exaggerated. That he says that slaves were given very important trade skills and lifestyles, life ways of making a living. He has said some truly absurd things about this, and I don't mind labeling them that in the question. So I just would like any and all of our panelists to talk about what that does to the ongoing discussion of freedom in this country and to the discussion of free speech in this country when the President of the United States is saying slavery wasn't really that bad, which is what it boils down to, and what sort of tone that sets, what kind of trouble that makes for people who are genuinely fighting for free speech and freedom today. Wendy, do you want to begin with that?
Sure. I'm going to take your question in a slightly different direction, though.
Okay.
That deals with free speech. And the question is, should we permit, for example, on a college campus, people to come and speak and share those kinds of views, calling them truth, when we all know they are far from the truth. They are terribly damaging to our community, and they are setting our country in exactly the wrong direction. So if we value free speech, how do we deal with speech that is that harmful and dangerous? How do we protect free speech in the country while dealing with these extremely hateful comments that we hear?
Well, I think that's a fine way to take the question, because some people think that because the president doesn't say it, he doesn't use one of his more inflammatory manners of speaking, generally to say this, because he's speaking peacefully, that it's not an abuse, that it's not. I mean, there are plenty of people who defend him for it. So that's a good question.
Yeah. When Dean Boardman was speaking, and he mentioned 6th and Market, what I was thinking of is the current battle that is happening over the president's house that just happens to be located at 6th and Market. And it tells the story of 9 enslaved people who were kept by President George Washington and the effort by the Trump administration to wipe out that history. It is one of many sites that are currently under review by the administration due to an executive order that was signed earlier this year. And to me, the question is whether or not, you know, some people may view slavery in that way, and that is perfectly fine, right? But then other people may view history in another way. And to me, the question is whether or not if different viewpoints of history are allowed to stand. And that's what we're currently battling over. The Avenging the Ancestors Coalition fought for a long time to get the president's house established on Independence, on Independence Hall there. And so they're currently fighting to keep it there, keeping it valid. And so to me, it's not, kind of like what you said, Wendy, can people who have differing viewpoints, can they be allowed to speak? And now we have an administration that has a specific viewpoint and is trying to snuff out all viewpoints that disagree.
Right. I think we all deal with this question all the time. Can everybody expressing any view speak at any time to any audience, unfettered? Is that what the First Amendment really means? And I think there are those who think it does, and who salute that the extremity of that freedom that they believe it provides. But do we need to take a second look at some of these applications of free speech? Michael?
Right, I think kind of going to both of these points, I think it's very dangerous to have the government deciding, It's very dangerous to have the government deciding what is true and who can speak and what they can say and what the view is. And what is appropriate. And I do think that the First Amendment protects the right for somebody to be in the public square to say whatever they want in an unfettered, free way. There's obviously times, there's places, there's manners of doing that. But the government shouldn't be in the business of being the arbiter of what can be said or what should be said. And with respect to the question about slavery, I think that Cherri's mind went exactly to where I was thinking. The part of the First Amendment that people do not appreciate is not only that we have the right to speak, to read, to sing, but we also have the right to read, to learn, to understand, and to be able to have history and have access to history, to historical documents, to historical writings. That is a critical component of what the First Amendment means and the ability to express yourself. And so to the extent that the government is endeavoring to shut down that history, it also is throttling the First Amendment in a way that is entirely inappropriate.
Right, well, the question I think that is of concern to a lot of people is what message is being passed along to young people, to future generations, especially at this time of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, that well, maybe the Declaration of Independence was an extreme document. Maybe there's a problem there, and I understand the view that any opinion should be considered, but some opinions are a little bit more worrisome than others, I think is what Wendy was saying. So what would you do about this, Wendy? How would you regulate it?
I don't think it can easily be regulated. There are some forms of speech that the government does regulate. Sexual harassment, anti-Semitism. We do have laws that provide that there are outer boundaries of speech, but they are pretty, the boundaries are pretty wide. And so we know when we're dealing with sexual harassment, for example, there's case law that tells you what you can do and what you can say and when it crosses a boundary. But if the issue is, can we have speakers who are speaking about slavery in the way that you suggested? Is there anything that a college campus can do to regulate that? And I'm not sure there is, because the argument is that all ideas can be explored, and the university and the government shouldn't be selecting which opinions are the ones that we're going to hear. So I think what the standard free speech response is, what we consider to be speech that we don't like, we respond with more speech. I actually don't think that is terribly effective.
I don't think it works.
I don't think it works either, but I think that's the response.
Yeah, I don't think it works either, especially in a social media focused world where the algorithm rewards inflammatory remarks and emotionally driven remarks and outrage. It's hard for speech that actually makes sense and that may be truthful to be elevated and amplified under those conditions, and so that worries me. I think what also worries me isn't necessarily, you don't necessarily see the government coming in and specifically saying, in many ways they are saying, you hear government figures saying that you shouldn't be able to say this, but what makes me even more nervous is the chilling effect that it has. You know, there's the threats, the calls to action by people in leadership telling private actors to take points of view, to take stands. And
stand by.
Yeah, and also to, you know, call people out. You know, you had the vice president telling folks in the aftermath of the murder of Charlie Kirk to call people's employers if they see something on social media, to try to get people fired, to try to get people suspended. And when you have government actors calling for this type of
network
behavior,
of informers.
yeah, and it begs the question as to whether or not that type of action extends, even though private actors are the ones, they've been called upon by government actors. And so it raises, I think, a host of questions, around, the potential chilling effect and the ripple effect. Because even if you aren't an individual who was actually fired or reprimanded, just those types of statements make you less likely to speak freely. And so there is, I think, a ripple effect that happens when we have government actors making statements like that.
So there's an irony here that in the name of greater speech, of freer speech, there's a risk of an inhibition on speech.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of self-censorship going on. Just because when you hear that you could get in trouble for saying things, people will say less. Right. And is that really what
that we want
about?
democracy to be? It's a long time in my particular case since I first heard about the Declaration of Independence in whatever it was, 4th or 5th grade or something. And I had thought that growing up in this political culture and having had some of the experiences I personally had, that nothing could shock me anymore. I mean, I really felt. But when I heard Donald Trump talking about the merits of slavery, which is what he was talking about, what he's saying, it wasn't so bad. I just thought, what's left? Who could be offended? Who could be done? And Michael, how does the legal community respond respectfully and yet as it needs to something like this?
It's important. David talked earlier about the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press. And I think it's important, not only today, it has been important for decades for the lawyers to stand up and fight for First Amendment rights, to fight for things, even if you don't believe what is being said is correct, you don't agree with it, to be able to fight for people's rights to say it. And it's critical now to do that for the press. There's countless attacks, and I'm sure we'll talk about them. And it's important for lawyers to stand up and fight for those things. But it was also important in the Obama administration, when there were more subpoenas to reporters than there had been in any other administration, for people to stand up then. It's critical that everybody hold the line at all times in order to be able to protect a right that is so fundamental to our country.
One of the problems with this principle, which is frequently re-enunciated, that anybody can say anything, it leads a lot of people to believe that they have a right to be listened to. And I just have come to be skeptical of the fact that even if you stretch this and you say that there's virtually nothing that people cannot say, it doesn't mean they have to be listened to. I'm reminded of the president of the University of Florida from a few years ago, who was faced with a state court order that he had to give a platform to Richard Spencer, who was then parading around as the leading neo-fascist in the country. And he said, okay, I'll do it. I'll put him out in the ag school with the horses during spring break, when hardly anybody will be around, and sort of mock the requirement. But I think that people have come to think they do have a right to be listened to. And as somebody who teaches rights and thinks a lot about free speech, I don't think there's a right to be listened to. And I think that may be part of the solution. I don't know how you all feel about that.
again, it raises the question of whose speech
Sure.
gets to be heard, and is there a heckler's veto, which is a very popular concept right now, that not only do people have Richard Spencer's and conservative voices have a right to speak on our campuses, but that we have an obligation as college administrators to prevent students from protesting and making it impossible for them to speak. Now, those of us who were raised in the 60s, in the Vietnam era, that's what we used to do. We used to
Sure.
stand up and shout down Spiro Agnew, for example, when I was at Goucher. And that seemed appropriate. And now we look at the heckler's veto, and we hear from the conservative side, you should not be shouting us down. So how we reconcile those ideas, I do not know.
I mean, I think there's a lot going on here. I mean, I think as a country, we've done a poor job of educating young people about what the First Amendment means, what the rights you have, but also what the responsibilities that come with those rights. And I do think, to Wendy's point, I mean, you do have the heckler's veto, but we haven't taught our children, I think, to listen to opposing viewpoints and how to engage with them in a responsible way, to engage in respectful dialogue. Last night there was a terrific discussion here at the opening reception between a Democrat and a Republican from the General Assembly, and they talked about the need to have that respectful dialogue. And I don't think that as a country we're doing very well at teaching our kids what it means to be to exercise your First Amendment rights, but again, what the responsibilities come with that. And we're seeing that play out on the college campuses now, and in the way things are being treated on social media.
Yeah, and I do think that social media is a big part of the problem, because a lot of what you hear are sound bites, and you don't get the opportunity to hear out a fully fleshed out argument. And arguments tend to have nuance, right? And I think about some of the old videos that I've seen where you have great thinkers like Dr. Martin Luther King, you have James Baldwin literally going on media, and they're persuading people. And they're making arguments, and people got to sit down and hear it from these intelligent, well-spoken people, and you got to hear the full argument, and people debated. That's what we need. We need formats where it's not just a 90-second bite. It's not just a certain number of characters and a quick edit video on TikTok. It's an opportunity, I think, to have fully fleshed out arguments, and I think that's what a lot of young people see. My bonus starter is 19 years old. She learns a lot from TikTok, but she only learns this much. And then luckily at dinner we have longer discussions where she's like, oh, I didn't know that part. I didn't understand this part. But it's much more complicated than 90 seconds.
So what do we do? I think you're onto something there. What do we do about it? How do we?
I think we need to bring back the public square debate. I really think that, really, I mean, and whatever you want to say about Charlie Kirk, I mean, there is something to be said about having people spar mentally and have full conversations and think things through. And I think that is what really changes minds. Not 90, I mean, and right now we're in this echo chamber of 90-second, 1-minute memes and all of this, and it's very inflammatory, and the algorithm doesn't support actual productive debate.
Right, and I think that it starts really educating kids at the earliest ages in schools, and say, like, sometimes people say things and it's hurtful and they should be, there are consequences to that, but you need to learn how to also handle that and engage in the discussion. And just because, as David said earlier, you can disagree with somebody, but you don't have to be disagreeable about it. And we need to begin educating kids in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, how to do that, how to listen, how to engage with stuff to learn, but then how to have a discussion about it and how to work through their disagreements. And I think that as a society, we're failing at that right now. We're cutting off discussion at those earlier ages and not promoting discourse when it would be most learned.
And the funny thing is, we all went to law school, so we're used to, I mean, law school, you debate. and it gets really tense, but then you're like friends at the end. It's just conversation, and sometimes you're not convinced, sometimes you are, but that was part of it. And I think we need that more.
Can I pick up
Yes,
on a
please.
point that Michael made, which is, sounds right, but is really complicated, and that is, if you are saying things that are hurtful, and I mean really hurtful, I've got great examples, which I will not share, there are consequences.
Yeah.
And my question is, what are those consequences? And just to set it in a school or college setting, if students say things to each other, either in person or online or both, should there be consequences when they have really threatened the sense of community? Things that are mean, unkind, but not threatening in the sense of physically threatening. What are the consequences? Are there any?
Some of the consequences, I think, are social, and taking this completely out of the university context, because I think it's complicated, private schools and in school settings and in different settings. But I grew up as a kid in Birmingham, Alabama, and there was plenty of, I'm Jewish, there's plenty of anti-Semitic statements that were made to me in harsh tones, in joking tones, and it was unpleasant. But the reality was that, I talked to people about it. Sometimes I dealt with it. Sometimes there were, people who got into physical altercations over these things. And there were consequences on both sides. But some of it is just living, as a country, we live with each other. We're married to each other as citizens. We have to figure out how to work through it. And so the consequences sometimes is like knowing your neighbor down the street doesn't like you for some reason that's should be out of bounds, but it is, but we have to figure out how to work through it and live together.
What should the school's response be?
Well, that's a more complicated question.
Well, that's a good question. What is the role? What is the proper role? If you can start over again, which we can't, but pretending for a moment that we could, what is the role of the school, the university, the authority like that? I mean, many schools, including the one where I find myself now at Georgetown, have a very active system of reporting bias incidents because they feel that those bias incidents, whomever they're directed against, are disturbing the sense of community and safety. And there's some very articulate people who have this job of doing this, and they're very persuasive people, but still it doesn't always succeed. So how do you calibrate this, Wendy? I mean, you can't come into your office every morning and straighten out your desk and say, what am I going to do to promote respect today? It just, you don't get the chance to do that.
Oh, that's exactly what I do. I think the answer, I don't know what the answer to that question is, by the way. I think that's what we're all struggling with. I do think the answer is different for K through 12 than it is for college kids.
Oh, of course.
If we're trying to teach our kids to be respectful and kind, which I hope we're trying to do, then I think administrators, school administrators have more leverage in actually disciplining students for conduct that we would all agree is mean-spirited and harmful. It's much more challenging on a college campus as we are talking about free speech and open debate. And we all have principles, codes that protect free speech and are clear that we don't discipline hate speech.
Right.
And the law has said to us, no, you can't discipline hate speech. One of the best known cases is at Temple University. So the options are challenging. We at Penn actually have set up an office that deals with anti-Semitism and
with
anti-Semitism. And their function is not to discipline, but to respond to complaints quickly and try and mediate, try and deal with both the complainants and the people who may have said things that are harmful and hurtful. We're clear that they don't discipline, but they act immediately to respond, to try and bring mediation or healing in complicated situations. But it's really difficult to do.
How's it going?
Actually, it's going really well. We're amazed, partly because we have extraordinarily good people who are managing this, and now people know there is a place to go, and there will be a response. It may not be the response they want, like fire that faculty member, but it's a response that brings people together and begins to have the dialogue that we're missing.
It's very interesting to hear you describe that, because it's pretty simple. It didn't take a task force of 25 people to figure it out.
No, it didn't.
And so why didn't everybody think of this sooner everywhere?
Because the issues are so complicated,
Yeah.
and people want more than mediation and bringing community together. They want discipline, and managing that
They
is
want
hard.
to win,
They want to win.
and
Right.
that's one of the most damaging instincts in all of this, I think, is that.
As I said, I think the reason that this is working as well as it is, and some people I'm sure will say it's not working as well as I'm saying it is that we have really expert people in dialogue and how you carry on dialogue and how you deal with really tense, difficult situations. And they're just very good at it.
Cherri, what is the role of, and I don't mean the sensationalist media necessarily, but how could the media be helping more in calming things down? Is that a legitimate function of news media to try to do that? You mentioned Charlie Kirk before. I was interested that you did. I actually don't know all that much about Charlie Kirk because I was not a part of his natural audience. But my impression is that he didn't do race baiting, that he did not do.
I don't know if I would necessarily agree with that, but I mean,
Well, I don't.
I can't say that I was a student of his teachings or his points of view. But I will say I don't know if the media's role is to calm things down. I feel like as journalists, our job is to be an accurate reflection of what's happening in the world. And if the world is not calm, our job is to reflect that. I think part of our job, though, is to dispel mis and disinformation, to make sure that at the very least, if people are outraged, they're outraged for the very right reasons and not because of some misstatement of fact or some misunderstanding. And so I don't think, our job is to sort of like change people's attitudes or try to control people or manipulate people.
Oh, I wouldn't. I wouldn't suggest control, but for years, I would have given the exact words of your answer.
Yes.
Don't bother me about that, because that's not my job.
But I think that, that's the job we try to portray. Like, I know I was a reporter for well over a decade, and now, I co-host a daily show. And we talk about this every single day, like, we don't want to be sensational. We want to be accurate. We want to make sure that if there are disagreements, that those are highlighted and that we give an accurate viewpoint. And if it makes people mad, so be it, but I think that's sort of what the balance is. And at least that's what we try to do.
Sure. but when the main actors in the society, or some of the most important actors who control microphones whenever they want to, like the President of the United States and various other people, can everybody just sit back and say, well, we'll just report what's being said?
No, well, that's not, I don't know if that's reporting. I mean, we do fact check. So even if the president says something and it's inaccurate, our job is to point that out.
Right.
Yeah.
And I remember some years back now, it's almost a naive moment when people decided they could say that the president was speaking falsity, untruth. But that seems so long ago now. There seems to have been a cascade. The water, the hydroelectric power generated by the presidents.
Yeah, I hear people say a lot. This particular figurehead said this thing, which has zero supportive evidence, or there's no evidence to support that statement. And you just have to try our best to report what was said, but also to report what the reality is. And so it is, it is a balance, and that's our job.
And it does feel disrespectful sometimes to have to be so blunt about it.
Well, our respect is to the facts.
Right.
You know, I don't know how
Fair
else
enough.
to say it. Our
Fair enough.
respect has to be
Yeah.
to the facts.
Yeah. Michael, I want to come back to this question of whether the legal profession has adapted adequately to these circumstances we're in now. It's just a few months, really, since the president was going out after individual law firms and saying, you will do this, you will give X numbers of thousands of dollars to causes that I specify. I mean, just reciting some of this is so horrifying. It doesn't sound like what's done in a democratic society, does it? And there were law firms that went along with it, by the way. I hope yours wasn't one. I don't know.
Right. So no, lawyers need to be able to do their jobs and represent their clients, and whether regardless of what the client has done, everybody needs a lawyer, and they need somebody to vigorously represent them in court. And the government should not be doing anything to restrain that. I believe that the one thing that has, we may be turning to talk to at some point here is then the role of the courts. And it is imperative for judges to apply the law and to protect the First Amendment freedoms, whether it's of a law firm, a journalist, or just a regular person. And when there's discussions about things like opening up the libel laws or curtailing First Amendment rights, I mean, it sounds great when you're on the one side and the media or the law firm or whoever it is on the other side of the issue. But those rights, those laws protect every person, and the courts ultimately need to be the bulwark against that, to protect against abuses by whether it's the government or anybody else.
But do you know of anybody who's come up with, this is a little bit of a loaded question, but is there a sort of handbook? Is there a de facto handbook of what a law firm does when suddenly the phone rings and it's getting some demands, inappropriate demands, from the federal government of the United States, which is supposed to be protecting the law? What are you supposed to do? What do you do these days?
If
That's
there's
over
a handbook, I would like to read it.
Right, and that's over my pay grade as far as what a law firm should do. I mean, as a lawyer, you're bound by the rules of professional responsibility and your ethics, and you have to zealously represent your clients. And in an individual case with my individual clients, that's what I have to do. And as a law firm, you have an obligation to represent your clients and do right by them. And I think that is the overriding calculus, and I guess that's the handbook that I would go by. But the decisions on that are well above my pay grade.
But I'll tell you, as someone who covered the first Trump administration as a reporter, the lawyers held the line in a lot of cases. You had lawyers, I remember when the travel ban went into effect, and I had to rush down to Philadelphia International Airport because people were trapped at the airport because this order came down. And it was the lawyers from the ACLU, other law firms, that went and did emergency petitions in the court and were able to restore the status quo for the people who were trapped. And so you think, about the work of the lawyers and how important they are to protecting the rule of law, constitutional rights, civil liberties, and for law firms to be threatened in a lot of ways and maybe be more reluctant. And I go back to what I said earlier about this chilling effect. So a lot of times it might not be that, you were necessarily threatened, but just the idea that you may steer clear of certain cases right now just to avoid the conflict. And I don't know if it actually happens. No one can prove what cases people decided not to take or why they didn't take it, but to me, it always begs the question, do the types of threats have a ripple effect, a silent, unknown ripple effect that we're not necessarily aware of, but that, you're like, look, man, I got 3 kids in college. Do I take this case? Look, I got to do this. Do I do this story? The chilling effect. Do I post this? And so to me, there's even more, there's that danger of a chilling effect, an impact, self-censorship that is unspoken, that nobody can prove or disprove, that I think just naturally happens when those threats happen.
The one thing that I would say is that, I think you're exactly right. I think that lawyers are holding the line, and I do think that there is, again, whether it's this administration or any administration, they're going to have political counterbalances. So just like, there's a potential chilling effect on some people or lawyers, there is a whole slew of other lawyers who are, ready to fight and people who are jumping into the fray. And so, that's, the equilibrium of politics, but it's critical for lawyers and law firms to be able to go into court to, fight the fights for their clients.
Michael, how do you distinguish between those two groups of lawyers? That one gets worn out and the others get suited up to do battle?
Again, in my practice, we, will take on Republican administrations, we'll take on Democratic administrations. My firm is representing the Associated Press and the fight over the White House press pool right now. We took on similar roles, in combating the Biden administration when they stepped across the line. The importance is the principle, and then we're going to protect our clients, our journalists, make sure that they have access to information, make sure they can report information, make sure they can speak their opinions. That's what we're going to do.
But Cherri is describing real intimidation. Maybe it's self-censorship. Maybe it takes that form. This is not a parlor game. This is.
I just wonder what happens, even if there's no conversations, right? Like, you didn't get the call, the administration didn't threaten you, but you hear all of this and you see all of this. And do you make different decisions because of that? Would you have made a different decision if that threat didn't exist? And I even think about, the fact that there are, President Donald Trump's, said, look, a lot of these networks don't like me. Well, maybe we'll look at their FCC, licenses. What kind of effect does that have on people who hear this or see this? And I'm not saying that it necessarily does, but you don't know.
You have to think about whether it is, at least.
Mm-hmm.
maybe not make an accusation without evidence, but you have to think about this, given...
Is there self-censorship? Does management shift focus? We've seen newspapers sort of change their editorial focus based on the administration. And so there is a ripple effect that happens. Sometimes it's not spoken. But it does, I definitely feel like we have to ask that question, and the courts always talk about the chilling effect on speech, and a lot of that cannot necessarily be determined or measured, but it does exist.
Well, what about the pick your battle mentality? Wendy, that must be something that...
That is what I do every single day, right?
Can you describe a little more of that to us? At least hypothetically, what some of these battles are you're choosing among every day?
There are new regulations coming from the administration. There have always been issues, even before the Trump administration. For a good example is the regulations on Title IX dealing with sexual harassment. Every administration has a new view of how we're supposed to enforce it.
True.
And we decide as an institution, is this something we're going to challenge, or is this something we can work with? The phrase that we use all the time is this the hill we're going to die on?
Right.
And that's a hard calculation. It involves institutional reputation, values, mission, commitment to the community, and recognizing that there are issues on campus that we really do need to address. And we can't hide from those behind, we're just not going to pay any attention to what's going on in the outside world. So, yes, every day we're looking at some new issue. None of which I'm going to specifically talk about.
No, I understand that. I'm not asking.
But there are, some issues are financial, and some issues raise real questions of our values. And is there any compromise? And if we do compromise, will our community understand that this was not the hill to die on? It's hard.
And there are always going to be people disappointed with those decisions.
Always. No
That's
matter
a
what
guarantee.
decision, right? No matter
Right.
what decision we make, there will be people, probably everybody, who thinks we made the wrong decision. For one reason or another, most people will challenge whatever it is we've decided to do. It's very hard.
That sounds like a very
Very hard.
difficult environment to be.
It's a very challenging world we live in.
Right, right. There's one other subject I want to bring up. John, can you remind me what our deadline is to finish here?
I have 20 to 25 minutes for a
I'm sorry?
10:15, 10:30. 10:30.
I'm not hearing.
10:30.
10:30, okay. Thank you. And I want to leave time for questions from the audience, the people who are kind enough to be here this morning. But there was something I think it was you I was talking about it with earlier, Wendy. The Trump administration had at first had a so-called compact it wanted to promote.
Correct.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
Yes. And so it was, first it was going to be a certain number of institutions that would commit to these principles of decency and Americanism and all, the American flag, etc. And now it seems this is supposed to be the standard for everyone. It's emerging that they have in mind not just an elite group that gets more aid, but this will be expected of everybody. What are the implications of that?
We just don't know. Right before I came in, I read an article in Inside Higher Education which I have to read every morning to know what my day is going to look like. And there's an article that discusses an announcement that was made on Truth Social, I think Monday night, where the president said, actually, every institution is eligible to sign our compact and get preferential treatment for research dollars. And we don't really know what that means. There hasn't been an official announcement. It was on Truth Social, so you're never quite sure
That's now like
what the implication is. We don't know.
it's now meant to have the effect of the Federal Register, Truth Social.
Yeah, there used to be regulations in the Federal Register. Now they're announced on social media, which
Right.
makes it very hard to know
Right.
what the new rules of the game are. So the answer to your question is, we don't know what that means.
I didn't mean to be respectful by laughing at first when you said, now the president says everybody can qualify. It's
Right.
like everybody's above average, everybody can be an A+ student. And you do have to wonder, well, who's left behind, or who really is advantaged by this? Probably nobody.
We really don't know, and
Right.
we don't know what the response of the community will be.
So I'm sorry to stick with you for too long here, but how do you go about finding out what to do about that? Who's your go-to person? Is there somebody in what's left of the Department of Education, or is there somebody in an education association, ACE or somebody like that, who can give you a clue?
We look for advice everywhere we can find it. So there's a group called the AAU, the American Association of Universities, which is a research association. There's ACE, which is a broad-based group of colleges and universities. We look to our community. We look to the lawyers in our law school. We have outside counsel, and we look to them for advice about how to respond. I talk to my colleagues at other institutions to see how they're thinking about it. There is no handbook.
No, obviously not. Cherri, how do you monitor that kind of situation?
And what do you mean, the compact?
Yes.
And what do you mean, as
Well,
journalists,
I mean,
or-
how do you make sense of it so that you can explain it, discuss it, ask the right questions to your guests on the radio? How
Yeah.
do you?
Well, we definitely talked about this on the show. I mean, we talked about what it means when universities don't necessarily fight back. We talked about what it means when, organizations are, threatened or whatever, and they don't necessarily hold the line. What does it mean for our rights? And so that is the kind of conversation we're having. But we also looked at the fact that, some of the organizations that were invited to be a part of the pact were like a nice way of saying, no, we don't want to be special treatment. It was like a nice way of backing out of it. And I think opening it up sort of took away the question of why were certain organizations chosen over others. But I mean, that's sort of how we just ask different questions about the broader implications, not, of this type of compact. Like, it impacts those schools chosen, but how does it impact the broader higher ed community and then the rest of us as well?
Right. And are you worried about this?
I think that there are so many other things. I mean, I do worry about higher ed because I am associated with, a number of institutions at the same time. I think what worries me even more is some of the challenges to the freedom of press. You know, the fact that, you know, you have the Defense Department issuing a 21-page document trying to force journalist organizations to sign this, and they could be reprimanded, you know, if they break certain rules. And so I was so proud and glad that so many of the news organizations decided not to sign on to this 21-page document. So a lot of those things sort of worry me when you can't do your job as a journalist, when you can't use your sources, when the only thing you can allegedly report are the things that are approved by a government entity. So those are the things that really do worry me when, you know, as someone who's trained to be a journalist, you're told, you know, you're supposed to be the watchdog. You're supposed to develop these sources. You're supposed to challenge the government. You're supposed to force them to verify. You're supposed to submit these FOIA requests and make sure that accurate things are being told to the American people. And all of the things you've been taught are being challenged. I definitely feel like that is very worrisome to me.
Michael, how is this changing the legal profession? Is there, what do you say?
I don't know that anything is changing the legal profession. I mean, I can tell you, I guess, like Cherri and Wendy, in my personal job, you know, every day is a fire hose right now in the First Amendment world. You know, I walk into the office and I have some sense of, you know, this is what my day is going to look like, and that gets thrown out the window, you know, usually by about 9:02, and that, you know, the emails start flooding in, the phone calls start coming in, and you don't know, you know, from what side or from who the issues will be, but every day is a different kind of day. And so as a First Amendment lawyer, I mean, it's these issues are obviously front and center, and you know, we have clients calling on us, you know, day and night to assist them, whether it's in information they want to gather, like Cherri was talking about, whether it's information that they want to get out and minimize the legal risk, or whether it's actual legal threats that are coming in, and can you help us, you know, fight against them? That aspect of my job, I mean, things have like gone off the charts, you know, over the past couple of years.
So the idea is to cope and see what happens.
No, I think Cherri may have alluded to, you know, like you got to strap on the battle armor and go to fight. You know, you need to be up on, you know, like Wendy said, you know, you need to look at a lot of sources, understand the lay of the land around you, understand what the legal developments are, but then you have to be prepared to counsel your clients, talk people through situations, and then turn around and be ready to enter the fray and fight the good fight.
By the way, I wanted to say I taught journalism law at Temple since 2021, and one of the exercises I would give my students is I want you to see the First Amendment in the news every single day, and I want you to pull out stories that have First Amendment or intellectual property or journalism legal issues in it. And the number of stories today, like I have a Google alert that comes every time First Amendment and certain types of words are flagged. And the list has grown longer and longer.
And it's only going to grow longer.
Every single day. And I remember there was a time a few years ago that my Google alert would be a couple times a week, maybe 3 times. Right. Now it's every single day, multiple times a day, and there's 10 pings. So that's the level of, you know, I think where you were talking about, Michael, like it has become a very serious issue, and it's growing, and I feel like it's going to grow even more.
Right, and I mean, I know that it's the case from my clients, but I also know, you know, going out socially with my friends and people who aren't in the legal industry, who aren't in media at all, and we sit down for dinner, and the first thing you start asking about is my work. It's a little disconcerting when it's entered that sort of public consciousness.
So the answer to your question, how has it changed the legal profession? Keeps the legal profession really busy and active, right?
So it's a growth field.
It's a growth field.
Yeah.
Do we have a floor mic, John, for questions? Now we can use this one. Are there people who have questions they want to pose to our panel? Okay, what I'm going to ask is that you come forward, and or the mic can be brought to you. Be sure you speak directly into the microphone and tell us who you are at the start.
morning. My name is Amir Richardson.
You have to speak much louder than
Much
that.
louder.
That's
Good morning,
better.
everybody. How are you? My name is Amir Richardson. I work at the Free Library of Philadelphia Foundation. I'm going to think in drafts and try to give you a succinct question, so I apologize in advance. I'm reading this book. It's called What is Free Speech? The History of a Dangerous Idea. I'm in the middle of it. I'm figuring it out. But there was a part in there where they talked about a moment in time when women couldn't speak. And there was somebody quoted comparing a woman speaking to seeing a dog walk on hind legs. It was really disturbing to read. And as I'm going through the book, it's talking about power, freedom of speech as it's connected to power. I would love to hear from each of you in terms of your ideas of, because I heard responsibility. I love that you brought that up, Mr. Berry. The chilling effect that you brought up, Cherri, Gregg, and the many different complications around free speech. But could you speak to power and where you currently see power lying in our democracy in 2025? I don't know if that was succinct. That was a little over the place.
I mean, I'll jump in. I mean, the thing about the First Amendment in the history of America is obviously, David talked about it at the very beginning. The arc of history has been right, but the history has not always been right for America. But the beauty of the First Amendment is that it does really place the power, gives people tremendous power in their hands to speak, to persuade, to convince people of what is right in the direction that they should head. And at this moment in time, the country has tremendous power spread out among all of its citizens, and people are free to speak. And in some ways, we've talked about the evil of social media, but on the flip side, it's never been easier for any person to be able to put something out onto YouTube, to put something out onto social media, to go onto Substack and get a following, to persuade people to come and listen to them. And that is tremendous power. And I think that in some senses, the power has been greatly equalized in that way. In other ways, not so much, because obviously people who, if you have greater resources, you're able to spread your message further, enlist other people. But at the same time, there is tremendous power through the internet, through individual people to speak right now. I do think that power comes with tremendous responsibility.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what you're saying. And I think about the First Amendment and how it is pretty much the bedrock principle of America. And one of the reasons is we have a representative democracy, right? And how can you govern yourself? How can you make decisions if you don't have information? And so having the unfettered access to information, being able to speak your mind, being able to share ideas, I think is a critical part of that. At the same time, you have an administration that is trying to kibosh ideas that they don't agree with. And it's so interesting. I wrote this down because it stood out to me. According to a recent YouGov poll, more than half of Americans would describe the current state of freedom of speech in the United States as somewhat or very bad. Only 27% describe it as good. And so this, to me, is one of those bedrock principles that you don't want more than half of the country to say it's bad. And so because it is so linked to power, self-governance power, and also the ability to change minds and to change administrations. And so to me, I'm kind of worried when I see numbers like that. But to me, it's about self-governance, and it's about the power of being able to share thoughts.
I think it is a power, and at this moment in time, it may be the most important power that we have. And what we're seeing is, as people join together and express their views, the various protests across the country, the meetings with congressional representation, when the community says, we don't like what's happening now, the chorus responding to what's happening to media figures. When Jimmy Kimmel was taken off his program, there was a groundswell, there was a voice that exercised the power of free speech and made a huge difference. So I agree with that notion that free speech is power. It is our power, and we need to be able to continue to use it. Joint voices are critical now.
Can I just jump in and, I guess as a lawyer, maybe offer a footnote and underline something that Cherri said, which I think is really right and ought to be highlighted here, is that part of the power isn't just the speaking out and trying to persuade, as we've each talked about, but it's also using that power to get information from the government. All around, the Commonwealth here, there's, boroughs, county commissions, school boards, government proceedings that are closed. There's records that are not being provided by the government at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level, all over the country. And one power that citizens have through the First Amendment is to be able to access those things. And just as people have the power to speak out, they have a power to be educated and to hold the government to account by ensuring transparency. And more people should be using the power in that direction as well, because speaking out and telling your opinion is one thing, but making sure you're doing it with accurate information and being able to understand what the government is actually doing, that is a power that people have that they don't use enough, the power to petition the government, to hold it to account and use it in your speech.
We started a little bit late, so we're going to go a bit longer, and we have time for a couple more questions now. Be sure you speak up and directly into the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Alice Milliken. I'm a fact checker. I work with investigative journalists. And a question I had for you, you haven't talked much about the current Supreme Court and how their actions and decisions seem to be signaling that they are willing to go in opposition of the Constitution. And I'm wondering, in your professions as lawyers and as journalists, if this is raising concerns for you about the protection of free speech for journalism and potentially for the public, especially as the term free speech has been politicized as the right to be heard versus what we might understand it to be if anyone has the right to speak.
That's a very good question. I thank you for it. Are we worried about the Supreme Court being that ultimate protection?
I know I am worried. We just did our show the other day previewing this current Supreme Court term, and there are a lot of worries because precedent has been upset by this current court, and you would think that stare decisis. It's a rule that you learn that when there are certain cases, the court typically follows past decisions. But this court has made it pretty clear that they're willing to tear up past precedent that they disagree with, and so I don't know what's going to happen. There's a Supreme Court case dealing with First Amendment that's related to conversion therapy, which is a very unusual way to look at First Amendment rights. It's a situation in where a psychologist who sort of uses her method of therapy. She's trying to say that the rule banning conversion therapy would infringe on her free speech rights. It's a very unusual way. And it seems like the court is sort of leaning against that ban there. But there's a lot of questions, I think, about how far this court will go, whether or not they will protect free speech, whether or not they will give the government, the federal government, more rights to quell speech. I mean, we just don't know.
I would say the Roberts Court, going back a couple decades, I think it's First Amendment jurisprudence is a complicated area. In many ways, it's been extremely protective of First Amendment rights and free speech rights. In other ways, it's been much more muddled, and I think the story is not yet fully told. Again, in the space where I practice, there's been a lot of discussion about the New York Times versus Sullivan, the actual malice rule. Mm-hmm. And there have been a couple of calls from justices to revisit it. So on the one hand, you're a little bit nervous about what that means, and you sort of see lower courts calling for it to be revisited. But then a couple years ago, the Supreme Court decided a case that didn't get a whole lot of attention nationally, called Counterman, that involved what kind of mental state of mind is required to prosecute somebody for true threat. And there, the court overwhelmingly talked about the importance of having a high mental standard, a high requirement of intent or reckless disregard in order to prosecute somebody. And that's the same kind of standard, the same kind of principle that underlies Times versus Sullivan. And so giving the court's ringing endorsement there, I think it's unlikely that actual malice standard in Times versus Sullivan would be reconsidered. But again, it's a complicated situation.
There are justices that wanted to revisit that.
Right, there's justices who have said that they want to be revisited, but so far the court has rejected it. And in this other case, clearly went the other direction. And so I think the story has yet to be fully told.
Wendy, anything to add?
Only that the way the court has decided the questions that have been presented on their emergency docket have raised concerns. Whether they will go that far when they actually reach the merits of these cases is really the question that we all need to watch closely.
Yeah, they've been overwhelmingly in favor of the Trump administration on the shadow docket.
Yeah. Could imply a whole different approach in the future.
May well, yes.
Other questions?
Is this on? I'm Hillary Link. I'm the president of Drew University. I have a gazillion questions.
Hillary, can you please speak a bit louder?
Okay, hi.
There you go, better.
Is that better? I'm Hillary Link. I'm the president of Drew University. I have a gazillion questions for Wendy, of course, but
none of which I can answer.
No, I know, me either. That's partly what I wanted to ask more to Cherri. In higher ed, we're seeing a lot of fear of retribution, and obviously, publicly, we're seeing retribution against perceived critics of our government. And I'm curious, from your media perspective, are you experiencing people unwilling to come speak, for example, on your shows, on colleague shows, because of fear of retribution?
I think people are just fearful, and that's why I talked about the chilling effect so much. We were trying to put together a show on the Canary Mission. I don't know if you've heard about this. It's this list of college professors who've been deemed to be people who are anti-Semitic or pro-Palestine or considered to be like traitors or what have you. And so we were trying to do a show about that. We reached out to so many people, and you would be surprised at the number of people from our region and at local universities and students even who are on this list, very much reluctant to speak out because their names are on the list. I also talked to students who had visas, right? And had been part of news stories previously. They wanted stories to be taken down off of the website. They did not want their name included in things because they were very nervous because this new administration has threatened to revoke visas for people's point of view. Even if the point of view wasn't necessary, it was very innocuous. It didn't have anything to do with anything controversial. They just did not want their name mentioned at all. And so there is, I think, a reluctance, and that again, this is the chilling effect, the ripple effect. Even if you're not involved in anything controversial, you just do not want to be on anyone's radar, and you want your name taken down. And I think a lot of the student journalists that I spoke to, because they actually came to me in the spring, what should we do? Do we take it down? Many of them took it down because the last thing that they wanted to do was to jeopardize a young person's education, right? A lot of these students, they put everything. Their parents are sacrificing for them to be here in school, and so they can't risk losing their visas. And so a lot of people, for them, it's their careers on the line and everything. And so, yeah, I do think that there's a lot of fear, and that is the chilling effect that I was speaking of.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jean Darnell, and my question is, speaking to what you just said, Cherri, it's about checks and balances. People are scared because a power is running unchecked. No one is holding accountability. And so that's the reason why I feel like kids are not putting themselves out there, because they don't have anyone to have their back. And so my question is, from a legal precedent, when are we going to stand up as a people, as a collective, and say we have things on book for our Constitution that says this should not be allowed to happen? This cannot take place. Party cannot preside over people. When are we going to enforce our checks and balances as a community, as a nation?
Right, I mean, right, we need to, everybody, if there are legal consequences, lawyers need to be involved and protect those rights and protect those freedoms. I mean, people should not be chilled from speaking. But the other thing that's kind of reminds me of a little bit is Wendy's question about consequences. I mean, if people are going to take positions, they need to be held in account. And sometimes the positions are popular, sometimes they're unpopular. But that's the social consequence is you speak out and there will be consequences. You have to be ready to engage with that. And I think that as lawyers, our responsibility, again, depends on the particular case, but needs to be to protect our clients, whatever side they are on that, and fight for people's, at least from my perspective, fight for people's ability to speak their mind and protect them from the consequences.
Yeah, I feel like this term, there has been a reluctance, I think, to file some of the lawsuits. There has been a reluctance of people to speak out, because I just see a big difference. As someone who was covering the first Trump administration versus the second Trump administration, the resistance is different this time. I feel like there was more lawsuits. If something was threatened, people were filing lawsuits. You don't feel that as much before. I feel like, you know, with the threats against even higher ed, I feel like 8 years ago, lawsuits would have been filed, people would have said, oh no. Yeah. And now, because of the weaponization of some of the federal funding, I feel like there's political consequences to fighting back. And, you know, even with the Jimmy Kimmel situation, people were like, is he gonna sue? He has grounds to sue. But, you know, there were financial consequences. There would have been political issues. There, you know, business factors that were considered. And he, so far, hasn't necessarily filed a lawsuit. He is back on air, though. And the people sort of stood up for him. And people were canceling Hulu and Disney left and right. But I just think about that part. Because of some of the politics of this second administration, the calculus as to whether or not you file a lawsuit, as to whether or not you protest or resist in certain ways has shifted, and people are much more calculated than I think they were in the last administration. I don't know if my point of view of that is different from you, Wendy, on that one.
I will say there are over 400 lawsuits that have been filed. I think the big difference is that there's so many and they're so disparate that nobody can keep track of them.
There's a website.
And you're right. There is a website, Chronicle of Higher Education, lists them all. There are over 400 lawsuits. The question is, how much of a difference will they make? Litigation is not a panacea. It takes forever for these lawsuits actually to be resolved. And I think there is some noise created that people just can't focus on it anymore.
Right, yeah, I mean, I can't say that I follow all the lawsuits in all these different areas, but my sense is that there are a number of suits being brought about, all of these kinds of things by different, either private actors, by the attorneys general, by in the states, by nonprofits. The thing that I think that is troubling, beyond just the legal pressures here, is the disintegration of some of the norms surrounding how power is used, and the you know, what sort of like the pillars that hold up civil society here. And again, things may be extreme from the White House right now, but these same sort of norms were fraying in prior administrations. There certainly have been frayed at the local and state level. And again, as citizens, we need to hold our leaders accountable and ensure that those norms are protected. I mean, the Constitution really is a piece of paper, and it's only as good as what we as citizens agree as a social compact to uphold, and we need to demand that our leaders comply with not only the letters, in the words in the Constitution, but the spirit of it. And so much of that, I think, has been lost.
Yeah, and I want to point out, you mentioned this, it's kind of piggybacking on what you said, but Congress hasn't really acted. I feel like the Constitution, our government doesn't work without all the branches of government being fully engaged. And right now we have one branch of government that just doesn't speak up, and that's Congress. And so I think it doesn't balance out if you have one that is sort of silent, like it is right now.
It's a fair point. I think we're just about out of time, but before we end this panel, I want to ask each of you to answer this one question, which is, what we're describing, and not complete consensus, but close to it, is this a new reality or is this going to go away? I mean, are things going to get better again? Is speech going to be more in the clear, if you will, than it feels right now? Or is this a permanent change in our democratic system?
I'll take it first. I think it's a new reality, but I do think it'll get better. So I don't think we will ever be where we were a year ago, but I don't think this intense pressure that we're all dealing with right now will continue. I think there will be voices. There is power in free speech, and I think it will have an impact.
It's encouraging.
I have to think that.
I agree in a lot of ways. I do think we've been slipping into this new reality, and I think social media is a big part of that. And but I do think that it's going to get better because I think there's going to be this awakening in America of how much we actually value speech, and I think most people don't realize that they value something until it is under threat. And because of the threat, I think it's going to shake people awake, and they're going to fight for their rights.
So in some ways, I think free speech in America is stronger than it's ever been. We look over history and what people are able to do now. The vibrancy here. Last night I went to a concert for Philadelphia Music Festival. People don't think about music as speech, but the right to listen to whatever you want, to play whatever you want. Driving down here this morning, I passed countless billboards, people who in their row homes had signs in the windows cheering on the Eagles, or like bemoaning the Phillies, or whether it's Free Palestine or welcoming home the hostages. Countless going down Broad Street. In many ways, freedom of speech couldn't be stronger, but there are these looming threats. And I do think that, again, social media poses some challenges, but the power that the people have right now has never been stronger. And as long as we understand and recognize what those threats are and hold leaders to account, and as a society hold the line, then I think we'll be just fine. And like Wendy said, there will be brighter days ahead, but we have to recognize the threat, recognize it for what it is, and push against it.
Well, thank you all very much. This was a very valuable discussion. Thank you all for being here. We'll take a break for about 10 minutes now, 10 or 15. Thank you.